Thanks for joining us for our Safe Routes to School First Rural Communities webinar. Just so you know, I'm Katie Alexander. I'm the Director of Safe Routes to School at the Michigan Fitness Foundation. This webinar has been made possible with funding through the Michigan Department of Transportation, Federal Highways Administration, with support from the Michigan Fitness Foundation. So MFF, it's a nonprofit. We're located in Lansing, and we've been involved with Michigan Safe Routes to School since the program started in 2003. We administer the Safe Routes program on behalf of MDOT and provide training and technical assistance to schools and communities participating throughout the state. So hopefully today you're here excited to learn a bit about some of the work that we've done with our rural communities and Safe Routes to School. Today we're going to talk about, giving you an overview quick, we're going to talk about some issues that you want to consider in your rural community or with your rural school in regards to safe routes and students walking and biking. I'm going to give you a little bit on some of the infrastructure solutions and programming solutions that we've seen with some of our projects, and then also give you a few example projects that we've had throughout the state in the last few years, and also just provide you some additional resources and consideration. And then I'm going to open it up for conversation, questions. So as I noted, my name is Katie Alexander. I'm the Director of Safe Routes to School. I've been with the organization for about 6 years, done a lot of work with our communities throughout the state, including rural communities. So pretty excited to give you guys a little bit of information and some of my knowledge, share some of my knowledge, and hopefully can hear from you as well. So I'm going to start out here. I want you guys to hear about some things that are general issues that we see when we're going through and working with a community and a rural community specifically, and things to consider as you're thinking about your potential Safe Routes to School project. So those things are usually we're seeing along school route is high speeds, lack of connectivity, schools off of a highway, and distance between home and school. So those are important issues, important considerations. I'm sure there are others. Like I said, we'll have a conversation after that we want to hear about what things are unique to your community, to your school. So I want you to know that it's important to note that I'm talking specifically about Safe Routes to School programming and how connectivity and issues play into students walking and biking to school, but that I understand and we understand completely that these issues can be impacting how other community members or visitors are using amenities or not able to use these amenities and walk and bike safely. So I'm going to start out, I want to talk to you guys about high speeds. Rural highways tend to have high speeds. You know, that's where we see some of our schools are located. A lot of that has to do with school siting, the way the community is built, different things. And because of that, related to these challenges, high speeds on rural highways cause issues with drivers often perceiving them to have low traffic, and then they are going through kind of these sparsely populated areas, and they may be driving pretty fast, which obviously, cause a lot of issues. I'll talk a little bit about some solutions that you can think about here, especially if your school is located in an area that it is off a rural highway or high-speed roadway. Additionally, when we're thinking of our rural communities, we'll see that, especially in Michigan, there's a lack of connectivity throughout neighborhoods and subdivisions with regards to sidewalks or pathways. And when we combine that with high speeds, the scarcity of sidewalks or bike lanes, that these high speeds increase the likelihood of a child getting injured or a person getting injured, and the severity of those injuries. So because we'll see students more likely to walk just off the roadway, maybe in the roadway, crossing at places that they don't have a great crossing yet. So, when you have those two factors in place, it can create just an unsafe situation. And while we know that in some areas, communities can be somewhat resistant to sidewalk, they perceive this to be maybe a more suburban amenity in a way, that there are really substantial benefits to sidewalks and providing safety for people walking and biking. And just to reiterate that, we've heard that a few people talk about how they maybe moved to a location because it had lack of sidewalk. They like that their home or this place was more rural. And, there's definitely consideration with that. And when we have conversations with property owners about this lack of sidewalk and putting in sidewalk for students specifically, that a lot of people are actually really eager to help and work out their concerns and feelings about that. So I definitely know that that may be something some of you may be thinking about today as you're looking and thinking about, this is an issue, lack of connectivity is an issue for us in our town, but we know we have people that are not going to be excited about putting in sidewalk. I definitely want to consider that and work with property owners that have not been excited about that in the past and work with them to try and mitigate their concerns, and been pretty successful in a lot of cases. There's definitely some good precedent there. Another issue that we see a lot in rural communities is schools off of a highway. School siting is really important to think about as a community as you may be closing or opening schools and moving locations or whatever that may be. And I'll talk about that a little later on because I don't want to get into that too much, but while these locations probably make sense to accommodate parents and buses that are driving from far away, they can make it pretty difficult for a child to find a safe route to walk or bike. And so that even for children who live near rural schools, there may be obstacles. And because they could be bisected by a county highway, they may be facing a pretty rough trip to get to school. So, just thinking that if you're on a rural road, you've got that high speed again, you've got probably that lack of connectivity, this roadway that it's just a hazard for students. So, I understand, we know that's an issue too to think about. And then finally, the last thing I want to think about is distance. So we know that in some rural areas, students may be traveling long distances to get to and from school, which is not going to really accommodate walking or biking, right? So if you're coming 3-4 miles away, maybe more, walking and biking, it's going to be a pretty big barrier. And we know that just thinking of if you're a village and you have a school far out, there's some considerations to again, think about where that school is located. And we have some solutions that hopefully will kind of help mitigate those issues. So one of the first infrastructure ideas that comes up a lot in our communities is thinking of a remote drop site. And what a remote drop site is it's a location away from the school where parents, caregivers, or buses even could drop students off where they can then walk and bike to the school. And we usually see these about a 1/4 mile or more away from the school. This allows students to maybe be dropped at a remote location, quote unquote. I don't want it to sound like it's out in the middle of nowhere and by itself, but it's more that it's, an off-site facility. You can help kind of reduce congestion around the school, so you can have more people dropping at the site. It can get some physical activity before school. I'll talk a little bit about with programming here in a minute of kind of how that looks, but I'm specifically saying it's an infrastructure idea because you can actually build to the site. So if you have, for example, a local church or any other kind of community facility, maybe city hall, depending on where your school is located, or even if it's building its own site, this could be a site that you build sidewalk to, or you actually need to build out the site. And I'll give an example of that here in a minute. It's something that we see quite often, and we always combine it with programming because that's where we see kind of the best benefit and where it kind of really works out. One that we really encourage. Additionally, sidewalk connecting in the local village or town. Obviously, that's probably the main reason you guys want to talk today is that, you have some lack of connectivity, and getting that sidewalk into in your community, going through that Safe Routes to School planning process, you're going to identify the areas that we have a lack of sidewalk. I'll give you an example of a community that did that within their village and how we went through with the grant and actually did some infill for that sidewalk. This may impact just kind of that village, but then thinking through what are other solutions that you can provide through this process to kind of make it a comprehensive, holistic project. Someone already brought up in the chat the multi-use trail. This is where, we get a little creative with Safe Routes. So we don't typically do a whole lot of trail work with Safe Routes to School because our programs do tend to be focused in, cities, villages, townships, where we're doing that sidewalk work. But we do see some, and actually over the last few years, I would say, see even more, some communities that are looking to see how they can connect to their regional or local trail systems. So this is where you can kind of think creatively of, I'm a community that has a regional trail going through it, and maybe we could develop a spur off of the trail to the school where then students can walk and bike to that school using this trail. It kind of becomes a bigger community resource. We've seen a couple communities, and I'll talk about one in a few minutes, that have used their school site as a trailhead and kind of became a dual purpose. So there's definitely some creative ways that communities can do some work around this. And one of the places that I would encourage communities to reach out if they're thinking about this to start out is the Michigan Trails and Greenways Alliance. They have kind of a great resource on trail development and reaching out to local trail groups. I'll talk a little bit about some examples here, even local trail groups that have started the Safe Routes to School process. That doesn't happen all the time. We usually see the Safe Routes process start from the school or the municipality or a parent, but sometimes can happen. So definitely would encourage you to, in addition to your grant coordinator, to talk with them and to look up their website. Also, considering the speed limit around the school. So depending on where your school is located, we've seen this before, some schools don't have a school zone speed limit. That is something that the school can actually work with their local law enforcement agency to help lower that speed around their school. You would reach out to them directly, working with the municipality and the local law enforcement to get an actual school zone speed around the school. It's something that if you're on a 55-mile-per-hour roadway, that can kind of help reduce those speeds in that area. So definitely taking into consideration not only that speed, but again, when we're thinking of the physical factors around the school, if you're on a rural highway, it's kind of wide and things, it can really encourage higher speeds. So thinking of, as you're going through that planning process, how that looks and with infrastructure and maybe some other things that we could do about it. And this is where, again, your grant coordinator will kind of help guide you through that as you're doing this planning process. In addition, I wanted to talk about some programming ideas. I've already mentioned a remote drop site. I'm bringing it up again because to us, it's not just a physical location, it's also a programming idea that you really want to think about. I mentioned here Holt, Michigan. So the reason I do that is because they're a community just south of Lansing here that we've been working with on Safe Routes to School for quite some time. I don't have them as one of my examples, but I'm bringing them up here because they've done a remarkable job with remote drop facilities. So they actually at a few of their schools, they have all of their parents and all of their buses at remote drop sites. So nobody is driving physically up to the school, but students are all walking in and participating in their physical programs. So there are some considerations, obviously, they make depending on the student, and they have a coordinator that works on that directly, a Safe Routes coordinator in their school that works on that. But it's a really unique situation with programming, and not one that would maybe work for every school, but one that we've seen works there. In addition, to that physical location, you can think of, parking lot, a church, or anywhere else students can easily be dropped off. You want to think about who they're accompanied by. If you have a volunteer parent program that kind of manages that remote drop program, you can also think you are applying for Safe Routes to School funds. We can help kind of pay for a coordinator to run that. And if they're older students, thinking of letting them walk on their own, but these are some considerations you want to make when you're thinking about parents who may be concerned about students walking and biking. So it's definitely context specific and how you manage that. So I mentioned just a minute ago about lowering the speed limit along our roadways. You would need to do a speed study with that, again, where you're working with your municipality, your law enforcement agency on speed studies on that roadway to reduce that speed. So just kind of keep that in mind. So moving along here with our programming, so maybe a reverse of a remote drop site if you are having students that are in a village and going out to a school that's further away, is thinking of maybe like a walk or bike to bus program. One of our programs that we have up in Traverse City, Norte Youth Cycling, they do this where they have students biking and walking to specific school bus stops, and at those specific bus stops they have bike racks out so students can park their bikes, and then they hop on the bus and go to school. And this way, instead of the bus kind of coming to the front door of the house, they can bike a little bit further and get some activity walking in the morning. So kind of reverse on that remote drop site a little bit, but kind of an interesting take on that, or just getting that activity. In addition, and this can be in combination with any of these two programs I just mentioned before, but doing walking school buses or a corner captain program. So having an adult lead a walking school bus program, which is just a school bus route without the school bus. It's an adult walking to designated houses and picking up students along the way. And the length of that's dependent on, the school and the students and the route leader. And then the other consideration I want to take in mind is just working with your school and your local law enforcement agency regarding crossing guards. This is a big consideration that we want people to make because it's an important consideration when you have crossings that you may need an adult at, and specifically one that is a trained crossing guard. Taking that into mind, you would work with your local law enforcement agency. They actually manage crossing guards and the training and vetting of those position. So it's an important context, especially if you have a rural highway where you need to do some additional treatment for crossing for students if you're putting in any kind of sidewalk or pathway into a school. So be strategic and be working with your local law enforcement on that. So some other things I want to mention, that if you don't have a lot of time, you're just trying to build momentum and get things going, as we've talked about in other webinars and trainings, is that you want to start out simple and begin with smaller events, begin with a smaller walk to school day. Talk to principals and a few teachers to see who can come join you. Talk to the PTA and the PTO, people who would be interested in kind of helping get involved, people who are allies, and then figure out who, is not going to be so excited about this, and why, and how you can help kind of mitigate that. And again, that's where the grant coordinators here at MFF come in and can help with those conversations. And then as you build momentum, you can build that team to prioritize your program and your next steps, and work with the school transportation department to think of remote drop sites and identifying these unsafe intersections and crossings, and connecting with city and county planning officials to prioritize walking and biking around your school. So those are just some ideas that we've got. I just want to give you some examples of projects we've done and what those look like, so you can kind of have an idea. Again, each community is unique. Every school is different. There's context around some of these, what worked here may not work in your community, and what works there, in your community may not have worked in here. So just kind of keeping that all in mind. Just providing you some thoughts and ideas as you're going along here. So the first one I want to provide you is the village of Ashley. This is a village up in Shiawassee County. It's a rural community. You kind of see here on the map that the kind of the village here, and then as you start to go out, you see that it's more farmland. This project actually we started working with them in 2014, and it was led by the school principals and one of the village trustees, I believe, and just started that conversation of, we really want some safe routes in our community, and specifically, we do not have a lot of sidewalk around our school, and there are sidewalk gaps throughout the village. In addition, we have students that are coming from further away, 4, 5, 6 miles away to get to the school in the morning. So what can we do about that? And so we really went through that planning process to identify the places in the village that, the connectivity gaps were. And then we said, what are we going to do about the students that are coming from far away? Because we had such a great partnership with the principals and the village officials, they worked really hard to identify a location that could be a remote drop site. So the school is actually, if you can see it here, is over here on this side of the village. They identified a remote drop site that was further over here where there was a park, and it's quite small, so I apologize for that. But at any rate, there was a park off of one of the main roads into the village, so that parents weren't trying to go out of their way to get to it, but also could still drop away from the school and have students walk in, kind of lower some of that congestion in the morning. So it was really a win-win on their end and our end. I will say, because they were a smaller community, one of the considerations that we had to take into account was hiring an engineer and paying for that. And so they really started early, and they actually just constructed in 2018, so 4 years later. And they did that intentionally so then they could build that time in to come up with, making sure they had all of their resources in place for engineering. And it was, a long process. That's quite some time, but they kind of had a long-term vision, and that's really important as you're going through a Safe Routes project. My next one is Marine City and Cotterville Township. So we've worked with them where they were developing some infill in their community. So they had 3 schools that we were working with. One was a private parochial school, and 2 were public schools. And one of the big considerations that we were trying to make was that Bell River Elementary was actually located off of Chartier Road, which is a rural highway coming into Marine City. And so, how do we get students from the city into the school? And so looking at their pathway, their long-term plans for putting in trail work, we did some multi-use path along Chartier Road, and then put in some additional signalization at the light at King Road and Chartier, and then some pathway on the school campus to kind of help create that connectivity. What I want to say with this is it was multi-jurisdictional. You see we had township, city, we had St. Clair County Road Commission. This is actually located over if you're going towards Port Huron. And so we've got, multi-jurisdiction here. It was a good partnership, and everyone was really on board to kind of make this happen and to make this project kind of go through. And in addition to that, they came up with some really great non-infrastructure programs to encourage healthy activities, increase safety, So they were doing walking with police days and education. They had some really fun poster contests to put out information on safety for students and traffic laws, all of that kind of stuff. Good project on that end. And I will note with this project, this was actually started, our champion on this project was a grandmother in one of the schools. And so when thinking about your role in a school, you may not work for a school or for a municipality, maybe a parent, but don't shortchange yourself that you can really lead a project. Another example I've got here, we've not constructed this, they're actually working on construction this year, is Argentine Township in Genesee County, so up in the Bay Area. This was a multifaceted project, and the reason I bring it up is this has local transportation alternatives program funding in it, safe routes to school funding, and I believe DNR trust fund dollars, where they were trying to build a pathway. So it's a regional trail system that was started out by a local trail group called LAF, Linden, Argentine, Fenton, and Fenton Township, if I recall, where they wanted to build pathway through their communities. And one of the locations that this touched was the school. And so the school really got involved because they said, we've got students who are walking and biking and there's nowhere for them to go. How can we connect these two things? So it kind of all happened at the same time that this worked out to create pathway along the school campus so students could get in safely as well. In addition, they said, well, we've got these students that are able to connect on this side that are coming in from this part of the community, but how do we get students that are on this end of the community who may not be coming along here? And so they identified it at the south end of the campus in a remote drop location where they could have students be dropped off and then walk the rest of the way in. Definitely an interesting and multifaceted project that they worked on. And then the last one I want to mention, again, trail work here, is Leone Township in Jackson County. So this was, again, a combination trail and safe routes project. So a regional trail system connecting with a safe routes location. So we had the middle school here where they identified that a trail was going to be going along, a 2-mile trail that connected up into several subdivisions, where then they said, can we create a spur along this trail to connect to the schools so then we can have students walking and biking into the school. And so this is the spur that you're kind of looking at here. So that was, again, a unique example and really worked out kind of for that community. So we do really try and identify when solutions might be a possibility. And then, I've talked about some examples. I want you to think of some additional considerations. I mentioned school siting earlier. Obviously, that's not something you can deal with after the fact of a school being in place, but when we're thinking about where, this community is closing or moving a school system, it's something you really want to take into consideration is where is the school going and what's around the school? Are we building a sidewalk to the site? And that might even be something to think about as some schools go through, or districts go through rebuild at the site location, is just considering what is the sidewalk network or the transportation network look like for students to get into the school campus itself. So, it's something just to be aware of while you're going forward. And, we find that's really important because it's harder to do things after the fact. If you can take it into consideration before going forward with rebuilding, that's quite important. So, and then I mentioned earlier on one of the examples, at least, that interjurisdictional cooperation. This is really important. So if you're a township and you're looking to do a safe routes project, you're going to need to get your county road commission on board. You may be next to a city and next to a village. There might be municipalities that you're sharing borders with that your safe routes project and your school system might overlap. So it's really important to identify that. If you're a school district or a school, you might have multiple jurisdictions that are touched by this and that you want to bring on board into these conversations early. And even if they're not, it still might be a good idea to bring them in. So I've identified a few here and I'm just going to go through them. So the first one's not actually in jurisdiction, but just an organization to be aware of, the Safe Routes Partnership. They're a good resource to kind of lean on. So TSC offices and region locations. We do have the link here with the kind of area facilities, and you can kind of see the map on here of locations for your area, your community, and the link will kind of give you some more information. But if you're doing a Safe Routes project and your project might impact an MDOT right away, or even if it doesn't, it's still good to get these resources, to get MDOT involved in these conversations because, they're important. And the County Road Commission, I mentioned earlier, if you're a township, your roadways are going to be owned by the County Road Commission, and so you'll need to get them involved. But even if you don't, even if you're, city, village, whatever it might be, still get your County Road Commission involved, because it's an important part of kind of having that multi-jurisdictional cooperation and collaboration on a project. And one that you may not be thinking about, but is good if you took our asset mapping webinar, some organization reach out to your local health departments. We've seen in the past a lot of our projects started by local health department officials, and they really can kind of help lead a project and provide a lot of resources. They're coming at it from the health aspect, but it's a great resource to have and a good person maybe to have in your pocket to help lead a safe routes project. So just, kind of think about that as you're moving along here.